Okay, so to start, I think I'd love to start about talking about the sort of origin and inspiration behind it, because it is inspired a little bit by Little Red Riding Hood, and I would love to hear more about kind of the genesis of that and how, or I guess the reason why you felt that Little Red Riding Hood and Danny's story would go together.
Yeah, turns out I wasn't the first. So Charles Perrault, who originally wrote Little Red Riding Hood, had meant it kind of as an allegory for not necessarily sexual abuse, but stranger danger with a sexual connotation to it, which is really interesting because I think as that has evolved and we all now think it's a Grimm's fairy tale, it has kind of lost that connotation. It's just been, just don't talk to strangers. But it doesn't go into the realities of what those strangers might do to you besides just eat you and eat grandma. So in that sense, it is not a totally original idea to me, but very much was born out of a love for mythology and folk tales and fairy tales. My parents are here tonight, and I grew up doing a lot of reading and a lot of hiking, and I think naturally when you think Little Red Riding Hood, you're walking through forests, following the path, and a lot of thinking about what happens when you wander from that path, how you get back onto it. And so this movie was very much born out of the idea of Little Red Riding Hood. If you stray from the path, how are you able to get back onto it when that happens, which it inevitably will.
Mm-hmm. And then because this is a Pacific Northwest Awards screening, I'd love to hear a little bit about why the Pacific Northwest was both where you chose to set it and also where you chose to film it, and kind of just anything unique about filming on location in Oregon.
I'll talk about the why and you can talk about what it looks like filming on location. So I'm originally from Eastern Washington, from a very, very small town, and the Pacific Northwest has very much made an impression on me as a person. I ended up going to film school in Los Angeles, and I've always wanted to figure out how to get back to make films in the place that I know and I love. Ironically, we ended up in Oregon, which is very confusing to people. I'm like, I should just start saying I'm from Oregon because it gets lost when you're talking about it. But we ended up scouting a lot of locations. We shot a teaser on the East Coast and the Hudson Valley, the Catskills, and we ended up looking for bigger forests. So we came back out to the Pacific Northwest. We drove up the Olympic Peninsula. We scouted cabins there. We went over to the east side. We scouted cabins all the way through Bellingham, through Leavenworth, and then made a giant circle back through Seattle and back down. But ultimately we landed in Mount Hood because it's hard to beat being 45 minutes from an international airport, especially when you're traveling people in. There's crew there. It's so civilized and also uncivilized at the same time. So it was just a practicality that we had to face. And Adam can talk about the practicality of filming there.
Sure. So we shot this back in the spring of 2023, and if you guys remember, there was quite a bit of weather that came in through there. We went to scout maybe a couple weeks before we were first shooting, and it was, a brisk 60 degrees, sunny and beautiful. And then maybe 5 days before the rest of the crew and cast showed up to actually film, it was hit with a bunch of snow. Portland was frozen over, and I drive a Prius, I'm from California, and so we were grossly underprepared for the elements, and it added so much to the film. It feels like you're in this magical landscape, and it truly felt like that filming there, but every day it just felt like you woke up and you'd see how much snow was on the ground and like, how are we gonna get to set? But ultimately, sitting back here, it's totally right for the film, and it was a grueling process, but it's all the better for it.
Yeah. I think we can open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions. Yeah, or I could bring you the microphone. No, that works. I don't know.
Okay, if this is Little Red Riding Hood, but the wolf is in the house.
Yeah, it's definitely not a direct following of the fairy tale. There's a lot of taking the pieces apart and putting it back together. There was a lot of debate of whether or not we should even say it was Little Red Riding Hood. The chapters were added in post. It was something we decided to do afterwards, because if you do start to pick it apart, you're like, okay, is this Little Red Riding Hood? But I think for the basic understanding of it's someone who strays from the path and ends up in a place they did not expect or hope to be, and is rescued from that by someone else, a stranger who they do not know. I think in that sense it does remain true to the fairy tale. At least I hope so.
Okay.
I should say no wolves were harmed in the making of the film. I hope that goes without saying, but just in case.
I loved how you used the music and, you know, weaving it through like different time, I mean, right from the very beginning and then his attachment to music. So I just wonder how you pick which music to use and when to use it.
Yeah, great question. Music is something that's really important to me. I grew up playing piano, again, shout out to my parents, but also studied music in college. And I think the films that I am really drawn to have recurring musical themes. You know, when you hear that theme, you know what the movie is. And I think especially as music evolves over the course of the film, when you hear a cue again and it means something different, is really lovely. And we try to do that in both the visuals and the music. In some ways they're tied. Like you'll see a visual that you've already seen, you hear the cue that you've already heard, and I think it helps build character through those aspects. And I think that's the amazing thing about film. Like that's why it is a format that we love, is that it has music and picture all combined. And it's 50-50 really with sound and picture. And just
You know, our composers, Sarah Barone and Forrest Ritson, they're real life partners, and they, I think our Kelsey's younger brother, also our editor, connected us with them, and they were amazing collaborators and amazingly talented, and you know, we owe a lot to the film to them.
And the other aspect. We have to also touch on Adam's dad is a real stereophile and inspired this character who is like, do you not hear that? You don't hear that? And this is Adam's dad. His stereo system is amazing, but he will pull you and be like, but do you hear the difference? Yeah, I think so.
All the Marantz receiver, all of the tube amps, all that stuff was from my parents' garage. My dad has mounds of stereo equipment, so he was stereo consultant.
So in the seriousness of the movie, there's all those little bits and pieces of humor mixed in, and some of them, like even with the very opening scene where he gets out of his SUV with the, you think like, oh, he's gonna have a gun, but he's got like this metal detector, and it just looks like, you know, it's like the guy in the lawnmower movie or something like that. So was that intentional?
Yeah, I think for a movie that's so heavy, I think having some levity is really important. And it's interesting because we've seen this movie a number of times, and we like to sit in and hear like where people laugh. And usually people won't chuckle quite that early. It takes a little time to be like, oh, I think they are trying to be funny. Like for me, it's the convenience store where he's like, it's a deal only if you have 4, and he's got, that cracks me up. But that's usually there'll be one person who maybe laughs, and by the time we get to the raccoon, then a couple more people will laugh. But then you get to the scene in the kitchen and people are chuckling. I'm like, oh, you're about to be very sorry you just chuckled through this. So it's like, I do think you want to set people at ease, and I think with something so serious, you want there to be levity and humor. And our woodsman, Ivan Martin, adds a lot to it. Like a number of things are improv. When he walks in the house, he's like, nice kitchen. That's all just Ivan. But I think it adds a lot to it.
So we worked with Ivan on a previous film that we both worked on, and it was an action comedy, and his role was a goofball, totally off-the-wall funny guy, and we worked with him, and every time we did a take with him, it was something new and exciting, and I feel like neither one of us had worked with an actor like that, and so we approached him about this film, totally knowing it was like out of that wheelhouse, but we just thought he was an interesting, captivating sort of performer. And he brought a lot of the humor, and yeah.
And we did do a pass of the script with his voice in mind. I think like, when he shows up and he says, I'm not stalking you, that was definitely an addition later down the line where we knew Ivan was gonna do it. It's like, okay, he can pull that off. I don't know if everybody could.
Well, first of all, thank you for this movie. It's awesome, and it's very brave in exploring these themes. My question is on the woodsman, I think. So this is like 2-part. Part 1 is what made you choose his character to be someone with a trauma of drinking and driving? And the second part is towards the very end of the movie, there's like a sign that's like in memory, like was it already there, or?
No, so we didn't do a whole lot of production design. We couldn't afford to, frankly. Like this was a very, very small movie, but that sign was one key prop that we're like, we have to have that. And our production designer is just a one-woman band. She got the sign made, she went out there and hammered it into the ground herself. Amazing. But I think in making the story about Little Red Riding Hood, the idea is that the woodsman comes and saves Little Red Riding Hood, but we wanted to tell a story in which strangers save each other. And so the woodsman needed some kind of past trauma in order to connect with another person. And for me personally, filmmaking is really weird because you're pulling from real life, you're also just making things up, and it becomes just an amalgamation of things. But it was very much, that storyline is inspired by something that was told to me very, very young about a young man who would hit someone with his car and killed them. And I always wondered, like, how do you move on past that? Like, how do you, especially in a small community, how do you reintegrate? Do you just leave? Like, what on earth are you able to do? And I thought this idea of the guy whose Sisyphean task is to try to save something, to do something outside of himself, was a good way of telling this story of two people coming together to set each other free and give themselves a second chance. And today, I leaned over to Adam while we were watching him walk away, and the phrase that came to mind was, "You're not as bad as you think." And I feel like that's something that I always come to in the stories that I want to tell, is you're not as bad as you think. If you could step outside yourself, if you could be someone else just observing this, you probably wouldn't judge yourself as harshly as you would if it was you. So this is also a hard movie to talk about right after. I feel like everyone needs some time to digest. Oh yeah.
I have one more question that I thought of is, I would just love for you to talk more about the wolf and
Yes.
shooting that scene.
The wolves were tough. Filming with animals is very expensive. It's something we knew when we signed up for this. It's something we didn't really have in our budget when we set out to do this. We knew how much it cost. We knew we wanted to bring the wolves to Oregon to do it. Ironically, all the wolves are in California. I'm not sure why. In the last couple of years, like, there's been a lot of wolves who have died in Oregon and Washington. So the movie wolves, the actor wolves, yeah. The wolves are thriving in Washington and Oregon. But the movie wolves are in California, and they're very expensive. So we wanted to bring them up for the shoot, but we didn't know if we could do that. So a couple weeks into shooting, we ended up having one final investor come on board, and we said, all right, we're bringing the wolves. And they drove up from California, but it was very magical to see them run through the woods. They brought 3 of them because each one does a particular task. And truly, it is made in sound design. No wolves were chained up. They're not shrieking or anything. I think the very first take, they put a string around there. They wrap it loosely around, and the wolf can pull away. And the very first take, the wolf pulled and went, oh! And I was like, oh, we're done. Okay, I think we got it. Like, we can figure out how to make that work. But we were very sensitive to not hurting the wolves at all. But it was a complicated scene because it's also lit by flashlights. The actors are holding the flashlights. So you're telling them, like, okay, point the flashlight here, but act like you're looking here. And also there's a wolf, but there is no wolf. It's quite the challenge for them.
When they're holding the board, it was actually our production designer on all fours behind the board making sounds of a wolf and pushing against it so they had feedback and everything. It was quite helpful for them because, you know, it's kind of an odd thing to pretend is going on.
But there are some really interesting videos if you watch online, people setting wolves free in this way, and it's quite magical. Originally we wanted to shoot it as one shot and you see it all unfold, but we couldn't afford to do it that way.
Yeah, well, if there aren't any other questions, anything else you want to
Yeah,
leave us with?
we'll hang out after if you want to talk, but thank you guys for coming out. Truly, we're thankful that SIFF is supporting films like this. It's a very independent adventure. So, and also our last screening, so it was really nice to see it in the theater with you guys all tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you.